Hello, everybody. Welcome to Views on View. I am Steve Edwards, the host with the face for radio and the voice for being a mime, as you can see on your screen, but I'm still your host. And with me today, as has frequently been true in the past, is Mr. Erik Hanchett. How you doing, Erik?
Hey, Steve. Good to be here. Good to be here. Big episode.
Big episode.
Big episode.
Huge, as certain former presidents would say, huge. Anyway,
This is a big one. Stay
Huge.
tuned for the
Stay
announcement.
tuned. So for those of you who have been in the Vue development community, you know Erik from Program with Erik and writing books on Vue and all that kind of stuff. Needs no introduction anymore. In fact, I have people calling me and saying, hey, can you get Erik's autograph for me? So anyway.
And I tell Steve I'm too busy. Send them to my publicist. That is the best way.
Publicist, that's right.
And maybe I'll get back to you 6 to 12 months if my schedule allows it.
But a little green always speeds things up too,
right? No, I take the I do take bribes. No, I'm just.
He does take. Okay.
No, I don't.
All right. Erik's bosses at AWS did not hear that. Anyway, so today we have no guests, and the reason we have no guests is this is sort of a retrospective because I have made the decision after much thinking that I'm going to go on hiatus with this podcast, and for a few reasons that we will talk about throughout the program. Those of you who are familiar with some of the JavaScript podcasts that are around, another one that I do is JavaScript Jabber, and both of these podcasts are part of a larger organization by Charles Max Wood, and used to be called devchat.tv. Now it's Top End Devs. And if you go to topenddevs.com, you can see a list of all of the podcasts we do. They are on just anything from Ruby to Angular to React, Elixir, .NET. There's the Dev Influencers, Adventures in DevOps. And we've had other ones in the past, like Freelancers and Blockchain and Ruby and so on. So I've been doing 2 podcasts, and part of the reason is that just the time crunch from doing both and trying to do a full-time job and maintaining my public profile, which is very important. Actually, I have no public profile other than here. Probably one of my biggest time sucks is writing all my dad jokes. For those of you who are familiar with the episode, I do some dad jokes at the end of each episode, and just coming up with those is crazy hard. I'm not as gifted. I write them all from scratch. If you've ever seen them anywhere on the internet, it's because they got them from me. Just saying. But anyway, so that's one thing is the time, and 2 is we'll talk a little bit about how the sausage is made, so to speak. This in the past has always been a very guest-driven podcast for the most part. You will usually try to get a guest on to talk about something in particular, whether it's something in Vue, whether it's tooling or the components or testing or DevRel. We've had people from anywhere from Evan Yu, the creator of Vue, in the first 2 episodes, to Daniel Rowe and Guillaume from Nuxt, to Debbie O'Brien, who used to be with Nuxt, any number of people. And the problem that I'm running into more and more is just being able to get guests. Sometimes it is not hearing back from people. Sometimes it's just time that's needed to be able to contact people and say, hey, do you want to come on? And there are people that don't get back to you. There are people that do. And then even more, a little more of the darker side of the sausage is many times we've had guests that have scheduled and then they don't show up and you don't hear from them again. And I'll reschedule and they don't. So just a lot of things. And anybody who's done a podcast knows this. Erik's done a podcast. He did his with Dylan Israel, but yours was pretty much just you two. I don't think you guys had guests so much as it was just the 2 of you talking. If I remember correctly.
Yeah. I'd say any podcast that you do, just like having multiple hosts is important because even hosts can't make it to all the time.
Oh, heck yeah.
But to answer your question, yeah, it was just me and Dylan Israel. We had one called Self-Taught or Not. We had a couple of guests, but mostly just us 2. And it was hard to even between the both of us to get us scheduled make sure that we had time for both of us to make it to the podcast.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. This is, I mean, after doing this is probably about 4 years that I've been doing views on Vue and JavaScript Jabber. Um, and I have immense respect, so much respect for the big guys, the big well-known podcasts that can do it on a regular basis, weekly, twice weekly, whatever their schedule is, and not miss and have people schedule. You know, you look at the ones I listen to, all the changelog ones, JS Party, changelog, Syntax, probably we're all well known, Shop Talk Show. Um, a lot of these guys, for the most part, they tend to have two people. They're always there and they talk. Like Shop Talk, it's just the two of them talking, and occasionally they'll have a guest. Syntax, it's always the two of them, and they do a separate one with the guest. Changelog and JS Party, you know, a lot of have the guests, but the ability to do it consistently over a very, very, very long period of time is really amazing. And I've done it for 4 years, two podcasts, so I think I'm doing all right. Um,
I can't
but
like going to. I'm just thinking about like syntax.fm. How how do they get they do like 2 or 3 podcasts a week now. They have
right,
one podcast that's a guest podcast, and now they have 1 or 2 where they're like a full length episode, and then they have like smaller episodes. And I just imagine like the amount of work that takes in coordination to get that off the ground every single week and then not miss an episode. That's insane.
right, yeah, they've talked about that. So they do. This isn't a paid advertisement, by the way. We're just talking out of our own knowledge here. But Monday is what they call a hasty, where it's like 20 minutes, 10, 15, 20 minutes or so. Wednesdays is a fuller length hour episode. And then Fridays, they added the supper club, where they have a guest to come on and talk about things. Now, they're fortunate that they were able to build up their podcast to such an extent that they were basically bought by Century. And so now they don't have to maintain their own sites and have their day jobs and do the podcast. They get a focus like really big on just doing the podcast, which is awesome. If you can build it up to the point where someone wants to buy you and let you do your thing, more power to you. That takes a lot. That really takes a lot. So anyway, there's that. Um, and like I said, I still have JavaScript Jabber that I get to do, that we record every week with Dan Shapiro and AJ O'Neill and Chuck. Um, and we have a great time. And we've actually been ranked as one of the top JavaScript podcasts in the State of JS survey I've seen in the past. So we're up there for sure. You know, and another thing with keeping a podcast is this is sort of a narrow um, subject matter. View is big and there's a lot, but it's hard to find any other podcasts that are just on a specific language so much. You'll get web specific ones, you know, like John Papa and Ward Bell, when they left, they were on this podcast, or at least John was, and they left and started one that was just JavaScript and script, and then they renamed it to WebRush because it's more generic, allows them to cover more topics. Um, JS Party does it, but again, that's JavaScript. It's not tied to a specific framework. So that makes it a little more difficult. Granted, there's a lot of topic out there, but you sort of put everything together, and it just makes it a little more difficult. Now, in our defense, I've already forgotten where we're at. We're up 400 something, I think, in terms of episodes. Or no, I'm sorry, 230. So we've done 230 episodes over 4 years, and a lot of good content.
Over 5 years, like 2018 was our first one, March 2018, right?
Right, right, right. So,
I
um,
guess around 5 years.
right. So
5 years.
with that, I'd sort of like to we'll go back and talk about the history, just because part of the reason I wanted to have Eric on, other than I like to have him on anyway, is that he was here from the very beginning, long before I ever came around. Um, so it was at the initial, there was him and a guy named Chris Fritz, who did, he was known, I knew him before this started from his Nux boilerplate repo. That was a repo that if you were using Nux Enterprise boilerplate, I think is what it was. Anyway, if you were having an enterprise type site, very large, very big, this was a boilerplate that you could download and had a lot of stuff pre-configured for you and stuff. So it was pretty cool. Um, and then Ben Hong, who is now at Vue Mastery, I've actually worked with him on the Nux course that I did for Mastery. And I think Divi on in the beginning. PBS I see her
Yeah.
on.
She came on, I can't remember what episode, but it feels like maybe 20, 30 episodes in she was on.
Right.
It sorta went so, like, the first episode, it was Joe Eames
Mhm,
that hosted, and
mhm.
he's big in the Angular world.
Very
He
big.
has Thinkster.io, and he does some stuff with ngconf, and I actually little known fact, I was on that episode, but what happened was I was working a full-time job at the time, and I had, like, some sort of meeting, I can't remember, and so I started on that episode, the first episode, and then I heard Evan you speak because that was the first guest in the first episode, and then I dropped off like 5 minutes later. So the first episode I was technically on and actually spoke was the second episode, and that one was getting started with Vue, and that was a really fun episode. I think it's still good to this day, and that was me, Chuck, and Joe, and we just talked about like what's the best way to get into Vue.js and oh, Cher was on there too. Cher Stewart, and we just talked about like what's the best way to get into Vue. We all kind of gave our little bit of histories of Vue, so that was a fun episode to start on too. So I really like this episode. Just to open up the kimono a little bit, Steve called me a couple days ago and just said, "Hey, this is what's happening. We're wrapping up Views on View. Love to have you on the last episode." Of course, I said, absolutely, I'll be on. In fact, I've been telling Steve I'd love to be like a co host for this show more regularly. Fortunately, because of my job, I can't, it's just a little bit hard to do like a full time hosting gig, but being able to co host occasionally was my goal, and sad to see this go. But he was graceful enough to graciously allowed me to come on this last episode. And I think it's a good book ending because I was on the first and second episode, and I'll be on this now last episode. But I also I'll caveat that to say that this is a hiatus. We don't it's indefinite, but I could see maybe one day if there was a big push that we might do another episode in the future. So you never know. I guess that's a what do you think about that, Steve?
Well, like I was mentioning beforehand, if somebody wanted to make a, say, a GoFundMe or Patreon push, I could always be, incentivized, to come back and do things that way. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Sometimes, you leave things and you miss them. It's like, dang, I wish I could, go back and do that. But we'll see. But what Chuck has allowed me to do, and sorry, I can't remember if I mentioned this, is that if I have view specific stuff that I want to talk about, then I can bring him on JavaScript Jabber, and we can. I think that has a bigger audience. Not sure why. Well, I'm on both, so that explains it. But but seriously, so I can bring on guests and we can cover view stuff and whatever. I have the flexibility there to do that as well. So it's not like this is gonna go away. But anyway, that's the plan going forward.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Let me also kind of going back to what you're saying about the different hosts. We've gone through
A lot.
a lot of different hosts on this podcast through the years. Like I said, it started off with Joe Eames and me, Chuck, but it then moved on to probably by episode 4, Chris Fritz came on. Chris Fritz is awesome. He actually wrote the forward for my book, my Vue.js in Action book,
Oh, that's right.
uh, and he was very uh, graceful, another
Gracious.
gracious person. I had never met him. I just like cold emailed him and said, "Hey, I'm writing a book on Vue.js. Would you be willing to write the forward for it?" He said yes, and he wrote this like amazing forward for it, and I'm really happy he did that. And so it was, and even John Papa came on the podcast. So for a while, it was just me, Chris Fritz. One thing I found working with Chris on this podcast in the first like 20 episodes was Chris knows so many people. I probably still to this day, but back then he knew all the core contributors. He was like basically a core contributor for Vue on the docs. So he knew
That's right.
all the Vue people. So he brought on Divya uh, Sasadaran, which is amazing developer, and she became a co-host for a while. He was friends with Ben Hong, with we just mentioned earlier from Vue Mastery, and he brought him on. And then pretty much Ben. I think between like episode 20 to 30, Ben was a regular guest. Maybe it's actually after 30. I know we kept on kind of rotating between Chris was at pretty much every single episode for the first, I think almost like the first 40 or 50. But then after a while, he became really busy, and then Ben really took over the hosting duties. And for those of you who have listened to Views on View for a long time, there is an episode I was trying to find it before we started where I hosted by myself, and it was probably the worst episode of Views on View. So if anybody finds it, tweet me at EricCH. I just remember being very nervous and being very robotic. And then there's one episode that it's just me and Ben Hong, and I'm interviewing somebody, and Ben's like, "Do you want to take over the hosting duties?" And I'm pretty sure I did terrible at it because I was very nervous and scared of doing it. That was interesting time. I think since then I've gotten much better, more comfortable on camera and in podcasts, and watching people like Steve, who does an amazing job at hosting multiple podcasts. But it took me a while to get that comfortable. But most of the time, Chris and Ben, they just did an amazing job of just carrying this podcast, especially for the first 70, 80 episodes. They brought in Ari Clark and just amazing developers, really smart Vue people to come in and really help run this episode for almost 100 episodes.
Yeah, it was just about 100. So we were looking back, and my backstory, I think I've told this before back. If you go back to episode 91, which was the first episode where I came on, we sort of introducing the panel. The previous panel had left for various reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with you, and had started their own podcast. And so I had gotten into Chuck's uh, wheelhouse, shall we say, made myself known because I would listen to JavaScript, Jabber, even Adventures in Angular back in the day when John Papa was on there and Joe Eames and Ward Bell. And then I had gotten into Vue, and I was so psyched when he saw uh, this podcast start out. And one of the things that Chuck was doing was a sort of a cool podcast called My JavaScript Story, and it hasn't been around for a while. He did it for a while, and when he started out, it was just a way, sort of an interview. Tell me about your story, how you got into JavaScript, what you do, that kind of stuff. And he would usually do previous guests that he'd have on had on JavaScript Jabber. Well, then he opened it up. And he said, "Hey, if you're a developer and you want to come on and tell me about your story, then send me a note through however I contacted him. I don't remember if you want to talk about it." And I was like, "Boom, okay, yeah, I want to do this." So episode 74 of my JavaScript story is me talking about my humble beginnings back in the days of BB6, and then PHP and MySQL, and through the Drupal world and into JavaScript through Angular and so on. And uh, so I got to know him that way. And then I'd emailed him and said, "Hey, I love these panels, these episodes. I've done a podcast before, which I had done years ago for a company called Acquia, which was founded by the Drupal founder Dries Boytart, and they're a main Drupal hosting company based out of Boston. And I love doing that, and that was fun. And I said, "Hey, I've done this before. I'd like to do it again." Well, not too long after that, he emailed me, said, "All right, you're on Views on View." I just lost the panel. I said, "Oh, okay." And then he had me on, I think, JavaScript Jabber right about the same time. And so I went back and looked, and the very first episode I recorded was with a gal named Paige Niedringhaus. JavaScript Jabber number 398. And she was talking about the latest release of Node at the time, which was version 12. And I knew nothing about Node and didn't know who she was. I was new to it. It is actually me and AJ on there, I think. And so, fortunately, she had given me some notes ahead of time about the talking points she wanted to cover. And so I just sort of walked her through those, and we talked, and then I got more familiar. And then I started hosting Views on View back on episode 91. Actually, before that, 91 was where it was just me and then Lindsay. Lindsay was the main panelist for a while, and I was with Lindsay. Um, but before that, I had done a few episodes before that sort of official introduction, and there were some guests. Dean, I already forgot his name, who was from New Zealand, and a couple of guys. And since then, I have pretty much been the mainstay through Views on View because we had Lindsay and I first met. For instance, we met Austin Gill. At the time, he was living in San Diego, and he had created a library called Vue Tensils, which is sort of a headless component type of thing, unthemed, so you could drop them in and then you can make them look a lot, sort of like Tailwind's headless UI. And there's a lot of other tools that are out there now that are headless. And we liked him and had so much fun with him that we said, "Hey, do you want to come on as a panelist?" And he did for a while. And then he moved up here to Portland. He actually lives here in Portland now. And I actually ran into him over the summer at a baseball game. And anyway, hit on for a while. Well, then he decided to start his own podcast, The Function Call, with a buddy of his. And I'm not sure if he's still doing it, but I know he's around. Now he's a DevRel at Akamai, doing real well there. I see him out in public quite a bit. I've seen some of his blog posts on Hacker News up near the top. So yeah,
Super,
he's
super smart guy. I met him at a conference this year, and yeah, he knows his he brilliant guy. He actually I see his Twitter threads, and he just breaks down things, and yeah, definitely superb developer.
yeah, he was a lot of fun. We've had other
I want
guests
to go
here.
back before we go too far in the
Okay.
future. I kind of want to go back a second.
Okay.
I will call out. We've had guests and hosts on this podcast that have created their own podcasts. Views on View is our podcast, but Enjoy the View was like an amazing like spin-off. I like to call it a spin-off podcast. Obviously, they're doing their own thing, but they created this really cool podcast called Enjoy the View, and it's all about Vue.js. I think they ended up stopping the podcast last year. But if you guys want to go kind of like nostalgia, there's still great episodes, still great interviews with them. I would check that out. Enjoy the View. And they had first it was Ben Hong and Chris Fritz and Ari Clark. But I think by the end they had kind of a new panel of people, including let me see here. I'm gonna get names wrong. I'm looking at their website, but
It's
they had
enjoytheview.io, right?
yep, enjoy the view.io. Alex Rivera. I just met him at a conference the other day, and just another really really strong Vue developer, nice guy. Tessa as well. So yeah,
All
if you
right.
guys want to check that out too, I just want to give a shout out to those guys because they did a great job too.
Yeah, it looks like they went on hiatus as of June of 2022, according to their last episode 93. So they got 93 episodes. But anyway, so back to hosts, we've had Lindsay at Austin. We had a guy named Raymond Camden for a little bit. There's a guy, Simon, I think he was in Nigeria. Yeah, we tried to have on a couple times, but it was a timing or connection issues. It was really difficult and ended up, only did a few episodes. But it was Lindsay and I for the longest time. And then, while I'm brain farting, the different people, I've had stuff like Drew Baker. Drew was a ton of fun. He's an Aussie. He runs an agency in Los Angeles, Funkhaus. I think it was named after his co-founder. Funkhaus had a German spelling, but they did some really slick websites for Hollywood type people. I think for agencies, talent agencies, or stuff like that. He was a ton of fun to have on, but that dude's a world traveler. He's in Australia, and then he's living in Europe, and then he's back here, and but he was a lot of fun. And then had Cody a little while ago. He wasn't able to be on for very long for, I guess, similar reasons for me dropping. He's just had busier, more things to focus on. So that was unfortunate because I liked him and he brought in some really good guests too. Recently, I had David Neal. For those of you who listened to the past 2 or 3 episodes, David, he goes by Reverend Geek. And I had initially heard of him on the WebRush podcast with John Papa and those guys. And what had brought him to their attention, what brought him to my attention was how he learned to draw to make his technical presentations much more engaging at technical conferences where he's talking about JavaScript type stuff. And if you listen to a story about all the hours he spent where he's like at the beginning, he was like me in that I have trouble drawing a stick figure. And he was the same way, but he learned after following people and practicing and practicing. He definitely has a unique style now. And what's really cool about David is he also appreciates dad jokes so much that he published a book recently of 306. Is it a book or a calendar? I can't remember. 365 days of dad jokes. And the story was that he just started drawing and he said, "You know what? I like dad jokes. I'm going to start illustrating one a day and I'm going to do it for a couple weeks." And he eventually did it for a whole year and created his book. So I've had him come on.
Big white
Uh,
beard guy, right?
yeah, think ZZ Top. No exaggeration. That is not an exaggeration. If you look at the streams on YouTube of my episodes with him, he's got the big old beard, glasses, and he's
It's so
my opposite. He's probably the opposite of me and Eric. He is one of the quietest, mellowest people. So we made a great offset for me.
I haven't listened to the episode, but I did meet him at VueConf, and exactly like you said, like very, uh, very mellow. He was very great. He was very nice. He told me, I asked him some tips. He's been a developer advocate forever, so I asked him some like tips for developer advocacy, and yeah, awesome, awesome guy.
Yeah, yeah, really, really cool. He used to do he's main job now is he's working at a startup doing data science stuff, big, large sets of data and data science and stuff that would make me go to sleep, I think. But and he still does Vue and JavaScript outside of that, but for years he was a JavaScript guy. So, he's liking that and still doing his drawing and presentations and stuff like that. But a real great guy. And he was sort of bummed about this just because he just come on and he was real conscientious like him. He was, "Hey, we got an episode today and what are we gonna talk about?" and that kind of stuff. Real great guy. A lot of fun. So yeah, that's it for the panelist side of things and our history with panelists. Just some very knowledgeable people that I always joke that when the guests come on that once they've been on here, then they're going to be famous, much more famous, and it's definitely a joke. Uh, but it's been fun to see where people have left here and gone off and done other things in the Vue community. For sure.
Is there
So
any? I'm gonna
go
put
ahead.
you on the spot here, Steve. Maybe you were gonna go down this road, but is there any? I think I know one. First, what has been your favorite guest, if you could pick one, over the last 200 episodes, and what's your favorite episode over the last, you know, 200 that you've been on?
Actually, that's exactly where I was going, was, okay, we've talked about the panelists, so let's talk about the guests. Um, one of the things my boss told me when I've been a hiring person in positions, I like to hire people that are smarter than me, which isn't difficult. And the same is true with the guests that we have on. Um, I like to get people that really know their stuff and then I can interview and ask questions about. And some of the guests have had on have been just amazing. If you look at back, I've met some really cool people that to this day I still keep in touch with. Eric being one of them. Um, Probably one of the more two of the more common guests that have frequent guests have come from the next world, believe it or not. One is Debbie O'Brien, and one is Daniel Rowe. Uh, Debbie is now at Microsoft, and she's in charge of Playwright. I think DevRel, or I can't remember what her exact position is, but that their thing is Playwright, which is a testing framework like Cypress, a front end testing framework. But I've talked to her 3 times. Lindsay and I talked to her a couple times, and every time she's had a different job. So the first time we talked to her, she lives on the island of Majorca. It's a Spanish island, I believe. She's Irish, but she lives on a Spanish island. And she's really a hoot. She's got a thick Irish accent. She's a ton of fun to talk to. But the first time she was working for Nuxt itself. And then the second time she had left Nuxt and was working for a company and she was having to learn React. And then the third time was when she was working for Microsoft. And so we were talking about Playwright and that testing framework. And if you ever go into the Playwright Discord channel, she's there. She's all over the place. She's making announcements, talking help. So she's a lot of fun. And then Daniel Rowe, was the other guy. And now since I started talking to him, and maybe there's a correlation, I'm not sure. He's become like the top guy in the Next organization. Knows everything about Next and what's going on. And he's sort of like David Neal in that he's very quiet, very, talks a lot slower than me, explains things really well, super friendly. He lives I think he's in London. Um, but I had him on 3 different times, and that was the times that I had him on, I had Drew Baker on as well. And so what you had was these 2 guys that knew Nuxt really super well. And I just sat back and let those guys talk because Drew's going, "Well, you can do this and this and this." And Daniel's like, "Well, yeah, yeah, you can. You can do this and this." And I'm like, "Sounds good, guys. I just let
Yeah.
you guys talk, and I'm just gonna sit back here and throw in a joke here and there and ask some questions because I had some really basic uses of Next, but not nearly to their level." So Daniel was always fun. Anytime I ping him in Discord, I was like, "Hey, you want to come on? Yeah, that'd be great." And I even when I was developing my Next class for Vue Mastery, he helped me out quite a bit and spent like an hour with me, explaining how to do things. And I ended up incorporating what he showed me into the course for sure. Um, but probably uh, there's a few other episodes we'll talk about later. But to answer your question, the favorite person and favorite episode for me was the one I did about a year ago with Taylor Otwell of Laravel. And the reason is that, over the past 3 years, I've been dealing with Laravel for my day job. It's a very huge, huge, huge Vue, Laravel, MongoDB, Elasticsearch app. It's called GovTribe, and it's a tool for government contractors finding government contracts. So it's sort of a niche thing. But I had been getting into Laravel, and so um, I'd I'd been a couple years in, and I said, "Hey, let's see if I can get Taylor Otwell. What the heck?" And I'll tell this story. There was actually 2, him and one other person who was very big in the I'll just say development community. I reached out to at the same time. And this first person, I bugged. I was being very insistent. He didn't get back to me, and then I bugged him one too many times, and he let loose on Twitter. Says, "If I don't get back to you, it's because I'm too busy." And I was like, "Okay, I won't bug you anymore." But Taylor was like, "Yeah, that'd be great. That sounds like fun. When do you want to do it?" I said, "Okay." So we scheduled it, and he showed up. And what was funny, I forgot there was one other host I got to mention, Luke Diebold. And Luke used to live in Australia, very big in the Quasar community. He's a real big developer with Quasar, which is a Vue-based, I guess it's sort of a component library. I haven't worked with it myself very much. Um, we've talked about it. That was how we first met Luke, was talking about Quasar. And part of the reason Luke was unable to continue hosting was that it was like 3 in the morning his time, or 4 in the morning or something like that, Australia time. And it was just too much for him to get up that early for our recording time. And so he dropped off. And I was bummed because he's a hoot. Luke is fun. If you ever go back and listen to his episodes, he's very upbeat and excited. He's got his Aussie accent, which I love, and we think of some great questions. But he had dropped off for a while. And so we have an internal system, like emails and notifications when a new episode is scheduled, we'll get emails. And apparently he was still on it. So uh, and he was a big Laravel user as well. And so once I got Taylor's okay and I scheduled it within 5 minutes, "Dude, Taylor Otwell's on. Can I come on? Can I join too?" "Yeah, yeah, sure. Like, that'd be great, Luke. We'd love to have you." So we recorded that episode. And at the very beginning, I sort of told all that story about Luke jumping on, even though at 3 in the morning just for Taylor Otwell. And Taylor sort of laughed it. But part of the reason I wanted to bring Taylor on was partially because of Laravel and just how ubiquitous it is in the PHP community, but also he does a lot of Vue stuff, and he was incorporating Vue into Laravel distributions. And in fact, uh, was googling for Vue stuff, a lot of times I'd find stuff on another site called Laracast, a guy named Jeffrey Way, and then I Taylor's name and Laravel was always coming up in the middle. I was like, "That's interesting." So we got to talk to him about the whole history of Laravel and how he got into Vue. And I forgot there's a a famous tweet that he made where he basically said it was really short, and he said, "React is too confusing. I'm going to look at Vue." And people were like, "Oh, really? Okay." And they started checking out Vue. And so now it's pretty tightly coupled, um, in that they have distributions like Jetstream and Breeze that you can use with Inertia.js, another topic I've talked about quite a bit on Vue, um, that I use myself quite extensively. And so it's really awesome that you can download a Laravel distribution like Breeze that has Inertia and Vue.js, and it's all wired up, and you just jump in and start coding and go from there. And it has all the built-in user authentication and verification stuff for you, so you don't have to throw that in. Great, but that was the only episode, and I don't know why it was because he was a super nice guy. Where I was actually sort of nervous when I started talking to him, little jittery for whatever reason. But once we got talking, we had a great time. So that's probably one of my favorite episodes. Um, but yeah, I mean, looking over the guest list that I've had, I remember one of the things I like doing is debugging. And there's a gal named Cecilia Martinez she gave talks at VueConf on debugging, and so we got to have her on and talk about uh, debugging different things, different people that have written blog posts or people who have startups that are used Vue quite a bit. And one other side of the guest that I'm thinking of now is I always used to joke that we're an international podcast because not like any other podcast isn't. But, I've talked to people from Africa, from India, from Asia, from Mexico, from, the US, from Australia, you name it. And so that's been a great thing for me to learn. And I end up bookmarking stuff later. Oh, that is cool. I
Yeah,
really like that.
I didn't realize, and I've obviously realized since, but there's such an international audience for Vue users. Like they're just all over the world. Like you're probably one of your favorite open source maintainers probably doesn't live in the US. I want to say it has a bigger audience overseas than the US.
It could be. Yeah, it could be for sure. Um, so yeah, I mean, looking at this, it's sort of blurs together after about 4 years. Oh, here's another one that I've had on a couple times, two or three, is John Leader.
He's on
John,
my list too. I was
yeah,
gonna.
he runs Beautify. If anybody knows the Vue component library, specifically designed for Vue, and I have used it on projects in the past. It's really pretty slick, and so it's been fun to have him on two or three times, just to talk about what's going on with Beautify with their updates. And I know in particular uh, the upgrade to Vue 3, where they did a complete and total gutting and rewrite, has taken longer than he would have liked with some of the especially with complex things like data tables and some of the other components. But had him on two or three times. And he's been always a great guy to talk to. He told me, I remember the first time we interviewed him, um, it's been 2 or 3 years, and he told me, "Yeah, I got ADHD, so, you might have to cut me off because 'cause I'll keep going and going," and it was true. I just sat back that first episode and asked him a few questions and let him go, and he talked and talked, and it was great, a lot of fun to sit and listen to both backstories about the developer,
Mhm.
journeys as well as the products themselves. Um, but yeah, those are the ones that float to the top of my mind.
Yeah, I'll jump in with a few myself. I definitely double down on John Leader. Uh, I feel like I'm a broken record, but this year I actually finally got to meet a lot of my Vue heroes in person. So I just met him. I met him in 2019, or maybe it was 2020, but I didn't really talk to him. But this time I got to talk to him, and everything you said, I agree with. Uh, Great guy, and I really like Beautify. So another person in the early days, I was on a podcast, a Views on View podcast with Chuck and Divya, and we interviewed Natalia Topolini. It's episode 52, and it would she is a core contributor to the docs team for Vue.js. She's also a principal engineer at GitLab right now. And it was just really interesting to see her perspective. She was talking about Vue Vixens, Slack channel, uh, just everything in the Vue ecosystem that she's been doing, and she does tons of different conference talks and things like that. So that was a highlight. Another one is Maria Lombardo, and we got to interview her in episode 51. That was me, Chuck, and Chris Fritz, and another. She's really into accessibility. She did a really good talk at VueConf Toronto. She talked all about accessibility, but it was nice to have a different perspective on accessibility. It's just an interesting episode. If you want to learn about accessibility, I would go back to that episode 51. And then also Sarah Drasner. So I have always looked up to Sarah for years. She's really big in the Vue community. Now I think she's like a director at Google. And I actually had, at one time, I had reached out to her. So in the early process of writing a book, when I was writing my views on Vue book, not views on Vue, my Vue.js in action, not the podcast book, Vue.js in action. They ask you to do a forward, and I already said Chris Fritz ended up doing it. But originally, I don't think I've ever told this to anybody, or at least not publicly. I wanted Sarah
Breaking
Drasner.
news, you heard it here first.
I wanted Sarah Drasner to do the forward for the book, and I had never met Sarah. And I had no connections, and I just kind of basically went to her website and filled out the contact me section. And she had gotten back to me, and she had me send her the book, and she was just so busy, like she didn't have time to do it. And then I got Chris Fritz. I ended up contacting Chris Fritz because Sarah was busy and couldn't write the forward. Uh, and she had wrote me, I right before she went on the podcast. We interviewed her. I emailed her. I think my memory is correct. It's been a long time, but I emailed her and I said, "Oh, by the way, I'm the guy that kind of messaged you a year ago, a couple years, a while ago, asking you to write the forward for my book." And she's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I was so busy during that time. I couldn't write the forward, but that's awesome. You created a book." She was like so supportive, and just really nice about it all. And I'm like, "Oh, no problem. Thank you. You don't have to apologize." And she was great. And then we got to interview her. And I think at the time, John Papa was her boss. So John Papa like messaged her and like, "Oh, by the way, you have a podcast." And then she jumped on. And and she has just a really interesting story. She's done tons of stuff in the Vue ecosystem. I think she used to be a core contributor for Vue, and then I believe she gave it up when she went to Google. Uh, and she knows Chris Fritz and stuff too, so they have a background. But that's another one I would check out. It's episode 29, just to listen to her story and what she's done in the Vue ecosystem and what she likes about it and doesn't like about it. So I'll throw this out. I'd say the most memorable episode, and I've definitely I had a period between like episode 91 when Steve was on to, I don't know, 230. I wasn't on at all. I had taken a break and I was doing my own podcast. But in the early days, and I talked to Ben about this, and he didn't even remember this. But on episode 37, the episode title was Vuex, Vuepress, and Nux with Benjamin Hong, and we actually interviewed Benjamin before he was a host for Views on Vue, and we had all actually met up. So we got invited. I don't remember exactly the everything that happened, but all three of us, uh, Divya, Chuck, me, and Chris Fritz, were all in Utah at the same time for a conference, and we were at Park City, Utah. And this is when I think it was called like the Front End Developer Conference or something like that. I don't think they have it anymore. And Chris Fritz was speaking and Divya was speaking, and then I had my work pay for it to go to it. I'm in Reno, Nevada, so it wasn't that far of a flight to get there. And so we all met, and we met Chuck, and then he brought all his podcast equipment. And then we found like a spot upstairs in this hotel where they were doing the conference. We found a room. I don't even think we asked anybody. We just kind of walked into this room, and we set up all the microphones and podcast equipment, and then we just were like in a little. I still remember it. We were just in a bunch of chairs and around a table, and we just did the podcast in person. And that was the one, probably the first and only time I've done a podcast in person.
Mhm.
And it was just so fun, like being in person with everybody, like chit chatting, talking about the conference, and then we zoomed in Benjamin Hong, and it was just like the most funniest episode I remember. He was just so funny. We're all just breaking up, laughing. Uh, I think we even ate lunch together later. So it was just so cool to have everybody in the same room together doing a podcast. And so that's my most memorable one. And then later on, Ben became a full time panelist host.
Yeah, I was looking, just going back through and looking at some of the other guests. Another one that stands out to me was Val Karpov. Now, he's primarily known as the maintainer of Mongoose, which is the node ORM for MongoDB. And he's been doing that for a while. But he's also a Vue user, and he's very knowledgeable on promises and async await. And he's actually written a book on a little. I can't remember if it's a little book. I think I have it. But super nice guy, very fun to talk to. Very knowledgeable. He runs a newsletter and a website. I think it's Mastering JS. Um, and I know he's got like a job board that I've used in the past when my company has been hiring somebody. Yeah, he had him on JavaScript Jabber as well. Excuse me. Yeah, he has a async await.net, mastering async await, which is, if you've done anything in JavaScript, you know all about async await and promises. Um, Also known
Have
as
you
the
ever
code barbarian. That's right. So he's the code barbarian.
have they ever done I know you've hosted this podcast for a few years. Did they ever go back? I know COVID kind of messed things up, but did they ever try to do like live podcasts ever again with everybody in the same room? Or did you ever go fly down to Utah and meet Chuck or
No, I have met Chuck one time in person,
Mhm.
and that was because the only reason was because he was flying through Portland. He was going somewhere or coming somewhere. I don't remember what he was doing, but he had a layover at the airport for a while, and it's not too far from me. So I went out and sat down with him and talked and got a picture. It's on Twitter somewhere if you want to search my Twitter. But yeah, that's the only time I've actually met Chuck. I did meet, well, it's JavaScript Jabber. Yeah, he hasn't. I have never done one in person, to be honest. In all the
You need to
podcasts
do
I've
it.
ever
I'm gonna
done.
come to Portland. We're gonna do it in person.
Oh heck yeah, that'd be fun. I want to go to VueConf so bad.
I know
Um,
every single year. I think I mentioned this podcast before. I'm like, Steve, are you in VueConf? He's like, no, not going. And he
well,
works in Vue he's like been a Vue developer for like 20 years.
yeah, I used to
And
go to
yeah.
DrupalCon every year, but then my companies would pay for it. So now, to be honest, in 2019, was it 19? Yeah, I was working at a pretty huge corporation. It was mostly Drupal development at the time, and I was trying to drag them kicking and screaming into the Vue world with Nux with the site we were doing, because I was sick of dealing with PHP caching and that kind of stuff. And they had agreed, and I had tickets bought and scheduled for VueConf in Orlando, including a workshop with Evan Yu. And then through a chain of events, I ended up leaving the company before the conference
uh,
and didn't get a go. And I was so bummed. I was really looking forward to that one, being in one in Orlando, two getting to do the workshop with Evan, and three, I just love conferences because of the hallway track.
mm,
There's times where conferences I've gotten some really good technical stuff from sessions, but the hallway track and meeting people in person and sitting in developer rooms and hashing stuff out with the maintainer of something you're using was always awesome. And I've heard that talk. You and I talked about that
mhm.
here not too long ago about your recent VueConf and how that's important. So yeah, I've missed it. And then I'd been bugging my boss. Yeah, we got to set it in the budget. Okay, next year comes around. Okay, can we put it in the budget? No, we're not going to have enough money. We're cutting back, and we've had some layoffs and stuff. So So,
No, I
yeah, it just
understand.
hasn't worked out myself, and I've been too cheap to pony up for it on my own. Now, if they do one here in Portland or something close, I could deal with that for
I
sure.
think you could do a talk. Like, you have so many experiences. I bet you can put together a talk and be on stage.
Yeah, I suppose I probably could if I thought about it. I've done conference presentations before, back
Mhm.
in my Drupal days on things like Apache Solar and which is Elasticsearch, type thing. But, yeah, that would be fun. I could possibly do that. That would be fun for sure. But
That's
no,
one of
nothing in person yet.
that's one thing I'm learning just, like, doing this podcast, being on with you the last, few last year, and at the beginning, it's just the community, just, like, all the amazing people in the community, and then getting to meet the community virtually on this podcast or in person at conferences. It I'm just definitely finding, like, that human interaction is just awesome, and I'll take meeting people over the podcast, but I think there's nothing more you can't it's there's nothing beats just meeting someone in person, uh, and obviously we can't do that with the way this podcast works, but, it's definitely something I'm enjoying more and more as being a developer advocate and traveling around and meeting people.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Now I do remember listening to before I came on, there was an episode where Chris was hosting, and he was in the room with somebody. And he was like, first time we've ever met," and they were in the room recording together, and I
Yeah,
don't
was that the one I just mentioned?
it might have been. I thought it was just him and one other no, I don't think so. I think it was him and one other person. It
Okay.
wasn't the whole group of you.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't
ours
remember
was a
which one
whole
it
group.
was. It
I
wasn't.
think Chris traveled a little bit too, and he was very dedicated to get, because he also did tons of conference talks for Vue back then. I gotta look up Chris. I wonder what he's doing. I'd love to, like, catch up with him.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I do remember when he stepped down from the Vue Docs team. He'd made a blog post, I think, about it or tweet or something along those lines.
Mm,
I remember when he stepped down, and I think it was just like a lot of people, time constraints,
yeah.
and he was a pretty big contributor there. But that's been 2 or 3 years. I was mentioning to you before, it seems like a lot of people have gone through and worked for Netlify at one point
Yeah.
or another, like Sarah Drasner and Divya and stuff. And so when I was at
Ben.
Fluke and I was trying to get them to use Nuxt, I had actually set up I did a conference call with them, with their salespeople, and with Divya, um, just to talk about what would be involved in hosting our company's site on Netlify using Nuxt. So that was the one time I've actually talked to her in person.
Yeah, it feels like
Uh,
for a while, like, you wanted to get a guest on for Views on View, you would contact someone that worked at Netlify.
right.
Uh, I guess I don't know if there's a company like that equivalent. Netlify kinda changed. I heard they went to more of an enterprise focus, instead of
Yeah,
just
seems that way. Who did
GMAG.
they buy? Didn't they just buy somebody?
They bought I thought they bought, gosh, it was like that GraphQL View. Wasn't Gridsom, was it?
No, no, Gridsom. Gridsom never really got that big. It never really took off. Gridsom was supposed to be Vue's answer for Gatsby.
Right. Anyways, yeah, they did definitely buy a company, but I'm pretty sure that they are now completely on the enterprise track. Like, literally on their front page, it says Netlify is a modern development plan for enterprise. So I don't think they still offer some offerings for, like, a hosting for smaller companies, but I think they're mostly focusing on enterprise now.
Yeah, I actually have, I think my own site that I haven't paid attention to in years, is hosted on Netlify.
Yeah, yeah. I think they've kind of switched over to that. But yeah, but it still looks like they still have some hosting on there. Which, by the way, we do have hosting. Nuxt. We just released Nuxt hosting on AWS Amplify. So here's a plug.
That's called a shameless plug.
Yeah, SSR hosting.
Yeah, well, we talk about that in a minute when we get to picks and that kind of thing. And the most important part of the podcast, of course, dad jokes. But yeah, that's everything I can think about. One of the things I got to think about this morning, when I was going back and listening to parts of the first episodes where I came on, and I had a crap microphone. I was It was so bad, and I don't have um, the bandwidth or money to do like some of the, like the syntax guys, and they talk for hours about their offices and how they soundproofed everything, and this is the camera and this is the mic. I think I initially had, what was I using? Oh, I had one that I had used at a previous site. It was like a Uniden or something like that. And then on recommendation from somebody else on a panel, I had gotten the Blue Yeti microphone, and that was okay. My problem is that my office is here in the corner of my house. I have really high ceilings, and just regular walls, and so the sound can be very bright. And so with the Yeti, the sound was okay. It wasn't as good as I would have liked. And so after I did some research, and then I went and bought this microphone, the Shure MB7, which is the USB version of the SM7B, which is a really well-known, famous mic through the recording industry. The example I always heard is it was the one Michael Jackson used, and I've seen it used by other hosts. So with this mic, I compared to how I sounded when I first came on, and I sounded like I was in a cave somewhere. I sound better, not as good as I would like, but certainly a lot better than than what I sounded like way back when.
You never did you never did a tech episode, like how you record these episodes and what
Oh,
equipment you use. Have you ever done an episode like that?
no, probably because I would have enough to talk for about 2 minutes. I mean, really, I can remember when I first started doing podcasts, and I'll tell a funny story for Acquia. Back then, so this was 2005. No, 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 2011, I think, 2012, somewhere around there. And, um, back then I used Skype and Audio Hijack. And so the way it worked was, I would talk over Skype, and Audio Hijack could, capture both streams separately, right? And then there's a guy at Acquia that I worked with who had been a professional sound engineer in the past, and he gave me a GarageBand template. And so I would drag these audio tracks from uh, Audio Hijack into GarageBand as separate tracks and sync them up, and edit them, and do some things here and there, and throw in an intro and an outro, and then I could publish it from there. And one of the I want to say it was the second episode I recorded of that podcast. I did with the guy. His name is Robert Douglas. He's real big in the Drupal community. He was in Germany at the time, and we were talking about Apache Solar, and that was my real big thing, was incorporating search into Drupal sites. So we recorded for like an hour, and you have to go in and make sure that everything's turned on in both places. So I get to the end of the episode, and I realize, oh crud, I recorded myself, but not Robert. So I had to contact Robert and say, Robert, sorry, could we do that again? And he was kind enough. He said, okay, but this is the last time I'm doing it.
That was Views on View?
No, this was the Acquia podcast. This is when I first
Acquia.
started podcasting.
Got it. Have you ever had to have you had ever have you ever had tech problems to the point where you had to cancel the interview or stop the interview halfway through, or like at the end you couldn't use it?
Mm, no, I don't think since then I have had that issue. So once we started, uh, when I first started with JavaScript Jabber and Views on Vue, we were using Zoom to record, and there was, I can't remember how the what the setup was on the other side. The side note, one of the benefits about doing this stuff is that Chuck takes care of all the technical stuff, all the marketing and the editing and all that stuff. I just have to record, which has made it nice. And even then, it's still a time suck.
Mhm.
But we were using Zoom, and then somehow they would record from there, and they would take that in editing. And then we went to Riverside, uh, which was a pretty well known podcasting app. I'd hear other podcasts talk about using it, and the most awesome thing about Riverside was the sound effects. I was like, yes, because I had my rim shot that I could use my jokes, and there's a laughter, and there's some other ones I'd throw those in. It was so much fun just playing with that. And Riverside was cool in that the way it works is that records locally in your browser
Right.
instead of recording over. And then at the end of the episode, it uploads to the Riverside servers. And if there's always an upload status, and you didn't want to leave before it had finished uploading, but if you did, they'd send you an email. Hey, go to this URL so we can finish uploading your stuff to wherever Riverside. Um,
And then they started charging, so you guys went to another service.
Yeah, I'm
I'm
not
just
sure about the
kidding.
money side of things. I know it was a lot cheaper. So now we moved past 2 months, we moved to one called StreamYard, and
Yeah.
that's how we're doing the live streaming over the video. And we're supposedly have the sound effects because Chuck said he asked specifically about it, but I haven't been able to find it, and I haven't contacted them to. I keep saying that every week, and I have yet to actually do it and contact. How do I get my sound effects in here?
Yeah, StreamYard's
Um,
great. I use StreamYard all the time.
oh, do you?
Works great. I'm surprised though, like you've been lucky because when I was running my podcast, every now and then we would get a guest that just was on the most terrible internet connection in the middle of nowhere, like a string, and they would either cut in and out, or we'd have to turn off their video and like reduce as much bandwidth as we can, and
Hmm.
you would almost hear every other word. But I guess you got lucky that the tools that you used didn't have any of those
Well,
issues.
for Zoom, what we would do when we were in Zoom, I remember having to do this, is we would have to shut off our video,
Hmm.
because we weren't live streaming it either. So it was just, recording it. But that would shut up, and that would save bandwidth because you're not uploading and downloading all the video. We had to do that with Riverside. The one person we had an issue with was Dan Shapir, in
Dan
JavaScript
Shapiro.
Jabber. Dan Shapir, Shappir. He's in
Hmm.
Tel Aviv, Israel, and
Hmm.
he had a really cruddy internet connection. It was pretty bad. And so what we would do in Riverside is you can pause the upload. So it just sits there and records locally and isn't uploading as you record. And that
Ah,
would help out quite a bit. And then when we stopped recording, then it would automatically upload from there. And it was pretty cool. Um, but then he got fiber finally at his
mm,
place. So now it's not an issue so much anymore. But that was how we got around those issues. But yeah, of
nice.
course, I wanna say there was one episode where something happened and we couldn't use it. I don't remember what it was, but I
So
can't.
there is in the archives a Views on View episode that has never been released.
I don't think it was Views on View, I think it was JavaScript Jabber, I think. I
Uh,
cannot remember what it was and how we did
you
it or
heard it
got
here
around
first.
it.
There's a secret JavaScript
Yeah,
Jabber
right.
episode that no one has ever heard of, unreleased. One day,
It's in
maybe the archives they'll release it.
right, yeah, so when I die, they'll release it
It's
posthumously,
like
like
Doctor Who. Like
yeah, there you go.
they have like episodes from the 70s and 60s that have been lost,
Oh, really? I didn't know.
and
I've
every
never
now and
watched Doctor Who, so I sort of
yeah, so,
follow it,
like,
but
back in the day, like, Doctor Who was in BBC, and they
mhm.
would re-record over the tapes that they used to
Oh,
record the
seriously?
episodes.
Oh,
So,
wow.
like, there's a whole bunch of episodes that were lost, and some only have audio, and then some are, like, completely gone. And some have been recreated, like, in animation form.
Oh, in animation form? Oh, that has to be
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, that show's been around, what, 4 decades? 5 it's been
Yeah,
around
yeah.
crazy amount of time, right? They just keep changing who plays the doctor.
Yeah, I think it was released the week before JFK was assassinated in 1963.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. Interesting. Interesting. Sorta like the
Yeah.
Dread Pirate Roberts, in Princess Bride, where just a new person is playing the Dread Pirate Roberts now, and the old one's retired and living like a king in Patagonia.
Yeah.
Right, so we're about a little over an hour, so I guess it's time to wrap this one up for now.
Yeah, I think we
Um,
could wax nostalgia for another hour, but I guess, people probably won't wanna hear us all
right.
day long talking.
Well, you could always just hit pause and come back for it next time you're in the car or something, right?
Yeah.
So we'll get to picks. Picks are the part of the show where we get to talk about whatever we want, within reason, of course. This is where I always throw in my dad jokes, and once in a while I'll have a pick of something like that. I think one of the things I'm going to pick is that I keep being amazed at, and I don't have a particular blog post or anything, is if you look at some of the images that are coming out of the James Webb Space Telescope, the successor to Hubble, they are amazing. I mean, we thought Hubble was good when Hubble first came out, and I remember the Hubble telescope, they had issues with their lens and it got delayed and they had to do some crazy repair missions, and those were good, but the James Webb telescope is just unreal. Some of the clarity and the beautiful pictures. I saw a post, an article today somewhere, I think it was on Twitter, about a new star that they had discovered that was in the process of being born, and that takes a lot of time. So that's just been one of the really awesome technology things in technology that have come out lately that are really making an impact. Now, for my dad jokes, you're gonna have to imagine the rim shot. I'm sorry, I don't have it here. David was giving me rim shots the other day. That was cool when I was last week when I was talking. Um,
Ba-bum.
but there you go. So I'll do more than three. I'll do a couple more this time, being the last episode. Um, people say they pick their nose. Gross, I know. Tell my son, please. But I feel like I was born with mine. Right?
Ba-bum.
I didn't get to pick it. This morning, my wife said, "Why the heck is the refrigerator full of stir fry?" Said, "Sorry, I must have been sleepwalking again."
Ba-bum.
Right. The other day, I showed my son a photo of me. And I said, "This was taken 7 years ago." He said, "Wow, you haven't aged a day." I said, "Really?" He said, "Really? I'd say more like 3 or 4 decades."
Ba-bum.
And
That's a good
then,
one.
right. Oh, I cracked this one cracked me up partially because both my kids have been restaurant servers. Uh, so I went to dinner the other night, and when my food came, asked the waiter to come over, and I said, "Why are there pennies in my soup?" And he walked over and he whispered, "You said you would stop eating here if there wasn't some change in the food."
Ba-bum.
So good. It's like, "Waiter, there's a fly in my soup," except, "Waiter, there's change in my soup." So that's what I got. What do you have, Eric?
All right. I'm just gonna same shamelessly plug uh, because I spent all of last week at AWS reInvent, which is the big conference that AWS puts on, and we had a whole bunch of new announcements. And I think my most favorite one out of all of them, well, there's two. One is Amazon Q, which is our code completion tool. If you guys have used Code Whisperer and with VS Code,
Oh,
that's a
yeah.
neat plugin that you can add for free that you can do code completion. And then Amazon Q is our like business version of that. So it has some really neat features. Like one of the biggest ones a lot of people like to see is we had a demo of upgrading an app from like Java 14 to Java 18, and it actually listed out the steps and it showed everything to do and all the steps to do it. And you can actually just click yes, and it just does the upgrade for you. It also does remediation steps and looks for security vulnerabilities. So it has a lot of features like that. And I mentioned Java, but it works with JavaScript and all different programming languages, TypeScript, for all sorts of different development environments. And then you can also have it trained and learned on your own set of data as well. It has like plugins for a lot of different things like Salesforce and things like that. So that was a cool announcement. And the second thing was we released what we're calling Gen 2 of AWS Amplify, which is a code first way of creating your backend. And then it also has this really neat way of setting your data schema using AWS AppSync that works with the front end and in the back end. So it's a TypeScript way of creating your back end, which you can then use those same types in your front end to do data manipulation, like your mutations, things like that, using our managed GraphQL service. So two really cool things. You can check it all out at docs.amplify.aws. And we redid our whole document site. So it's much more modern, fast, looks amazing.
Awesome, awesome. Yes, I think we talked to you. I remember we talked to you when you first got to AWS about using Vue at Amazon. Pretty cool episode. It's really cool. I think a lot of the tools you work on is designed, I guess, if you want to get a site up and running using Amazon's infrastructure, right? It does makes things a lot
Yes.
easier for you out of the box for authentication or database or servers or whatever, right?
Yep. And also, I totally forgot. I mentioned earlier in the episode, but we partnered with the Nux team. So I met
Oh, cool.
Sebastian and we talked about Dan earlier.
Uh-huh. Did you meet
And
Daniel?
Daniel, yeah, I
Uh-huh.
met him earlier, but we talked more. And so we're sponsoring Nuxt as a company, and so we're part of their sponsorship, and they created adapter for us. So now you can upload your Nuxt site using server side rendering and upload it to Amplify hosting. And it automatically detects it. It's just a few steps. I did a whole video on my YouTube channel at eric.video on it. So if you're looking to host your Nux site, server side rendered, then yeah, check that out.
So, but you can basically just build your site locally and then upload it, and you're up and running.
Yep. Yeah, we mentioned Netlify earlier. I know they have something similar, but I
Hmm.
know they're switching kind of gears towards enterprise. But we are
Right.
definitely focused on uh, Vue developers, Nux developers. We also support Next, of course,
Hmm.
and we also you can actually upload any sort of site, Astro, Svelte, things like that too.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm an
For
Astro
website hosting.
fan. I'm an
Yeah.
Astro fan for sure. I good. Speaking of guests, Fred K. Shot, the guy that is sort of the front facing face of Astro. I got to interview him both on Views on Vue and JavaScript Jabber. Super nice guy, real fun, cool sense of humor. And they just released version 4, I believe. So I
Oh
definitely have to
yeah.
get in and play with that. They got a lot of cool stuff with transitions, I think, and some other things. So really cool. So alrighty, with that, we will wrap it up. Thank you, Eric, for coming on and being our bookend, beginning and the hiatus or end. We'll see how that changes. If you want to follow me and get a dad joke at least 5 days a week, Wonder95 on Twitter. Um, and yeah, I put them in Slack and Facebook, but that's probably the best way to do it. I had somebody from my church the other day tell me that, dude, I know some people that follow you on Twitter just to get your dad jokes all the time. So,
And thank you, Steve, for like literally putting this whole podcast on your shoulders for multiple years, working with guests, dealing with flaky people, hosts and guests for all these time, and just being like an amazing advocate and bringing this cool resource to everybody.
oh, you're welcome. It's been a great experience. But like I said, you can hear me on JavaScript Jabber, and we'll throw some Vue stuff in there too uh, as it comes along. So awesome. All right. With that, we're going to wrap it up. Thanks, everybody. And enjoy working with Vue. See ya.